All right, boys and girls, section 5-3, multiplying rational numbers. Example 1 is find 2/3 times 3/4. Write the product in simplest form, and product means multiply. So that's what we're doing. Most of you know how to multiply fractions, and this is probably how you do it, right? Top times top, 2 times 3 is 6. Bottom times bottom, 3 times 4 is 12. And just so we're clear, that is correct. And then most of you try to simplify, and we get, for this one, 1/2. And that's correct. Good job. I'm also going to show you something else, though, and it won't be as, you won't see the reason here on this particular problem, but it is important. So what we're going to do, 2/3 times 3/4. All right, that's already what we're doing. We're going to do this method called cross-canceling or cross-simplifying or diagonal simplifying. And what we're going to do is we're going to simplify this 3/3. And what is 3/3? Well, if we simplified 3/3, we would get 1 and 1, right? 3 divided by 3 is 1 on both of those. We're also going to simplify 2/4. What would 2/4 be? Well, let's find a number that goes into both. We know it's 2. So the 2 is now 1, and the 4 is now, 4 divided by 2 is 2. So all we did was take 3/3 and make it 1/1, and we took 2/4 and made it 1/2. All we did was simplify. All right, but what we do is, that's called cross-canceling, and what it can do is help us simplify this thing down before you multiply. On this one, it's pretty easy, right? 1/2 is the answer. But 1 times 1 on top, 1 times 2 on the bottom, as you already know, is 1/2. Now here's example 2, -5/12 times 3/8. And just to get this out of the way here, when we're multiplying or dividing, that's when we count the number of negative signs and we get rid of every 2 signs, right? Every 2 cancel out. In this case, there is only 1 negative sign in this multiplication problem. So what that's going to end up doing for us is that's going to give us an answer that has a negative sign in it. That's it. We're done with the negative. We don't have to mess with that. That's all that thing does. And again, the way most of you have learned to solve, you go top times top, 15, bottom times bottom, all right, and we get 96. Now, the tricky part, and hopefully you notice it here, is now I've got to simplify this thing. And this might not be as easy for some folks as it is for others. I can't say that that's the easiest thing I've ever done. But I am going to try to see what goes into 15 and 96. Luckily for you guys, I know that 3 does. All right, so 15 divided by 3 is 5, and 96 divided by 3 is, 32. So what I'm going to do, since that's all the way simplified, I'm just going to put it with my negative sign. That's the answer. So -5/32 is what you should get. But again, I'm going to show you the shortcut here, which is called cross-canceling. All right, so I'm going to do the same thing, but with 5/12 times 3/8. Now, 5 and 8 do not simplify. All right, but 3 and 12 do. What goes into 3 and 12 if we were going to simplify it? 3 does. 3 divided by 3, we get 1. 12 divided by 3, we get 4. There's nothing else on top and bottom that simplifies, so I'm going to circle all the numbers that I'm using because I see people making that mistake a lot. Their work is sloppy, and so they miss the number that they should be using. So I circled the 5 and the 1. 5 times 1, again, is 5. And then on the bottom, we don't have 12 anymore, we have 4. So 4 times 8 is 32. And then this negative sign, since there was not another one to cancel with it, ends up in our answer. Example 3 says find 1 2/5 times 2 1/2. Write the product in simplest form. So again, we're going to leave this in fraction form, but what we've got to do is our C method. We've got to change these into improper fractions, right? So we've got 1 times 5, which is 5, and then we're adding 2, which is 7, and then we're dividing by the bottom number 5, putting that on the bottom of the fraction. So that's 7 over 5, and then we're multiplying by this fraction, so we got to change this. 2 times 2 is 4, plus 1 is 5, over this bottom number, 2. All right, so we're multiplying this. It's pretty simple. Again, you could do top times top. You would get 35, 7 times 5, and you'd have 5 times 2 on the bottom, and then you'd have to simplify it down to the next one. But I'm going to try to save you some work here. 5 and 5, guys, that's one of the easiest simplifying. If it's the same number, if there's a number on top that's also on the bottom, cross them out, make them ones. That's so simple. Now we've got 7 times 1 on top and 1 times 2 on the bottom. That gives us 7 over 2. And the other thing I want to point out here is, if you did change this to decimal form, which you shouldn't, because this homework assignment is about leaving it in fraction form. But if you change those fractions, those mixed numbers, to decimal form, those are the 2 decimals you would get. If you went ahead and multiplied them, you would get an answer of 3.5, which is the equivalent to 7 over 2. Well, 7 over 2 we can also change back to a mixed number. So we do, again, bottom into top. So 2 goes into 7. And what you're going to find out, you can do this in your head, 2 goes into 7 3 times, and you get 6. And then what you try to do is find the remainder. 7 minus 6 is 1, so what happens is we get 3 remainder 1. As soon as you get to the decimal, that's when your remainder starts. So you get remainder 1, but what happens is we make this a fraction over 2. So when you learned remainders, that was in elementary school, and they were only teaching you that to make it simple. You were basically, what they were teaching you was learning how to change a fraction into a mixed number. So 3 remainder 1 is actually the same as 3 and 1/2, which I've already said is 3.5. So all 3 of those answers are the same thing. We're just wanting it written as 7 over 2 or 3 and 1/2. It would be great if you did both. Example 4, let's read this together at the bottom of page 240. The first drop on one roller coaster at a theme park is 255 feet. The first drop on another roller coaster at the park is about 11/20ths as high. Find the height of the drop of the second roller coaster. Well, the title of our section here is multiplying rational numbers, so let's take a wild guess here. We're probably going to end up multiplying. But what we're doing is we're finding that the second coaster, the second drop, is 11/20ths of the height of the first one. So again, that of word is being used, and we should know that of means multiply. So we get 11 over 20 times 255, but again, we're going to put that over 1 since we are talking about multiplying fractions. Now, what a lot of you are going to want to do, and I don't recommend this, you're going to want to try to multiply 11 times 255, and you'll get it. You'll get the answer, and you'll do 20 times 1, that's easy, but then you've got to simplify that big number, right? So I'm going to try to save you from having to do that. I know that there's a number that goes into both 255 and into 20, and I divide them both by 5. So I get 4 for this one, and then 255 divided by 5, you can do that pretty quickly. 5 goes into 225 5 times, and then it goes into this 5 once, so you end up with 51. Go ahead and divide that out if you're not sure. The 11 and the 1 are not going to simplify, so that ends up being what we'll multiply. 11 times 51 up top, and 4 times 1 on the bottom. Obviously, the bottom number is a little bit easier. 51 times 11, and you should write that out on your own if you're not sure, which probably won't be. But go ahead and do that, and you would end up with 500 61. Now, the cool thing about this number is simplified. It has, if you simplified everything in here compared to something on the bottom, then this number here will also be simplified. But the one thing we do have to do is change this to a mixed number. Again, here's how you do a mixed number. We do bottom into top. Instead of doing this and getting a decimal, we do this and we stop at the decimal and get a remainder. So bottom into top, 4 goes into 5 one time. You get 4, we get subtraction, bring down the 6, and 4 goes into 16 4 times there. That'll get you exactly 16, so now they're gone. I'm running out of some room here on my paper. So if you subtracted those, you get 0, and then you would drop down the 1. All right, so now 4 goes into 1. This can be tricky for some people. 0 times, right? So instead of bringing down the next 0, we've already reached the end where the decimal is. So if you're doing decimal form, you'd continue and you'd drop down another 0. But in this case, what we're doing is 1 minus 0 down here, and our remainder ends up being 1. So we bring the remainder over, and then remember we're making this a fraction over this bottom number of 4. So the mixed number ends up being 140 and 1/4. Those two, fraction and mixed number, are the exact same value. Now example 5 says find 2a over b times b squared over d. Write the product in simplest form. So now what we're doing is learning to multiply this with algebra involved. And so there's numbers and letters. We're going to teach some simplifying here. Now again, if you were doing this on your own, you would probably do top times top. So 2a times b squared would be 2ab squared. All right, that's just what it is. And then if you're doing bottom times bottom, b times d, you would write as bd. All right, so then the part for you is simplifying that. All right, so what I'm going to help you understand here is this is 2a, 2 times a, times b, since it says b squared. And on bottom, a little bit simpler, just b times d. All right, so if we're learning how to simplify, this is what it actually is if you expanded it. And what happens is we're just going to cross off one of the b's on top and bottom. B over b is the same as 5 over 5, which is 1 and 1. So those become the number 1, which is important but not really, so we're not even going to mess with it. There's nothing else that cancels out or simplifies, so everything on top, it ends up being 2 times a times b, and there's also a times 1, which doesn't change it, so we get 2ab on top. And the other b on the bottom canceled out, so all there is the letter d. The answer ends up being 2ab over d. Example 6, let's read it together. This is on page 241. The landing speed of the space shuttle is about 216 miles per hour. How far does the shuttle travel in 1/3 hour during landing? So if it goes 216 in a full hour, how much will it go in a third of an hour? So we're going 1/3 of the 216 that you go in a full hour. So it ends up being 1/3 times, of means times, 216 over 1. Now, if you were to simplify, you're going to simplify 216 and 3. Well, that's the same thing you would simplify if you just went ahead and multiplied. So we might as well do that. And luckily for you guys, we do know that 3 goes into 3. We hope that it goes into 216 if we're going to simplify, and it does. So you can see that in your book. Dividing by 3 on top will give you 72. 3 divided by 3 on the bottom is 1. So the answer ends up being 72 miles that you would go in 1/3 of an hour. Alright guys, so the secret word for this video is vessel. If you write that down on your notes in your book, make sure you don't tell anybody, and then I will make sure I will know that you have watched the video. So show me that when you show me your notes.